Hello, friends, and welcome to another session of Back Porch Forestry. I'm Dr. David Merker, Extension Forester with the University of Tennessee, and I have been waiting all winter long for to hold one of these back porch sessions in the snow. We had about a 5-inch snow, and I was ready to take it out and record it. But in speaking with our IT specialist, she informs me that under no circumstances do you want to take your laptop out in sub-freezing temperatures. So we are relegated back into my shop today for today's session. For those of you that are new to Back Porch Forestry, these are non-formal educational sessions that cover the topics of trees and forests and forest management. Today, we will be addressing the topic of herbicides, specifically why herbicides sometimes fail. Maybe you've had that experience before, and we will be addressing 10 different reasons why herbicides sometimes don't perform as desired. So let me go ahead and share the presentation, and we'll get started. Back porch forestry. Why herbicides sometimes fail. The result of herbicide applications is normally satisfactory, provided the manufacturer's directions are properly followed. But sometimes the results are disappointing, and this is true even with experienced applicators. So this session of Back Porch Forestry addresses the reasons why herbicides sometimes fail to perform as intended. Herbicides are used to accomplish all sorts of forestry and wildlife management objectives. And that could include such things as site preparation or food plot maintenance. Here's a picture where we are broadcast spraying an area that will be planted to hardwood trees. Herbicides, of course, are used for seedling release as well. And so you can see how these hardwood trees have been side dressed to improve the survival and growth of the hardwood trees. Herbicides might be used for timber stand improvement or forest stand improvement. This is a situation where a sweet gum tree was deadened. It was girdled with a chainsaw, and then herbicide was applied to this ring or to this girdle. And the result is that the tree adjacent to it, which was a red oak, is now released. So herbicides can be used for that purpose. Herbicides, of course, are used to control a whole host of exotic invasive pests. Here's a situation where privet was severed, cut down, and then the stump is being treated with an herbicide. Actually, there's 3 different methods that I'll show you. This is one, what we call a cut stump treatment. This privet is being controlled with what we refer to as a thin line treatment. Sometimes a step up from this would be a basal bark application in which the herbicide is being applied directly to the bark itself. And then privet, of course, can be controlled using a backpack sprayer and foliar or aerial application with a wand like this. So herbicides are used to control other invasives like, for instance, kudzu is quite common in West Tennessee. If you look at this picture, adjacent to it and to the left is an area that's going to be planted to trees, but prior to planting it to trees, we felt it was important to control the kudzu while it's easier to control than once it gets in the plantation itself. But what I want to point out is there's different applications here. And what we're seeing, this darkened band outside was applied 2 weeks ago, and you can see it's already dying. Herbicide in the middle band was recently applied, and it's just beginning to decline. And then off to the far right, you can still see the dark green where herbicide has not been applied. And then herbicide, of course, too, can be used for a host of wildlife management. This is a situation where a honey locust was actually deadened and herbicide applied to it for the purpose of releasing the sugar maple adjacent to it. Now, these holes weren't present before this tree was girdled and killed, but once it was deadened, then woodpeckers moved in, and then squirrels, and then eventually larger mammals like raccoons can benefit. So we do deaden trees for wildlife purposes as well. Well, I'm going to be covering quickly 10 different reasons why herbicides sometimes fail. And I began, they're sort of in a descending order of commonality. And I guess precipitation is what I would consider number one. Herbicides can be washed away shortly after application. And this is true both with liquid herbicides and with granular herbicides. And so liquid herbicides have a rain-fast period or a drying period when precipitation could move the herbicide off target before it's actually absorbed by the weeds. And so check the label to see when the rain-fast period is. So if anticipated rain is coming, make sure that you apply it well in advance so it has time to dry. Some herbicides need only an hour of drying time, while others require several hours. And if rain happens inside the rain-fast period, then it's quite possible that you'll have to retreat the area. So consider precipitation first. Secondly, the all too common improper application. There's a whole host of things that can go wrong with herbicide applications when you fail to calibrate your equipment properly, or when you use the wrong pressure in your spraying, maybe poor site preparation. There's a lot of thrash perhaps that's left on the ground that's absorbing the chemical before it reaches the soil. Improper mixing, faulty spray equipment, irregular ground speed, excessive wind, etc., and on and on. So all of these things can contribute to inconsistency or disappointment in the results. So make sure that you calibrate your equipment properly and then apply it properly. Herbicides sometimes fail too just because you didn't follow the label directions. Reading and following the label directions really aren't options. These are an obligation. And following herbicide label directions to the letter will help improve your chance of success, not guarantee it. Our weed scientist put it in a good perspective one time. He said, remember that the label is the law. And so follow the label before you begin applying your herbicides. Herbicides also fail because there was a failure to add surfactant. Surfactant is a liquid that's sometimes added to herbicides to sort of improve the coverage. It spreads it out more evenly and it reduces the surface tension, and thereby that improves the results, the uptake by the plant. So many herbicide labels recommend the use of surfactant, and yet this step is oftentimes overlooked. If you examine the photograph here, you'll see to the left, this is where herbicide was applied without surfactant and then with surfactant. And you can easily see there's a much broader coverage with surfactant. Solubility. This might not be real common with forestry and wildlife herbicides, but it could be. Herbicides that are formulated as a solution mix easily and they stay in solution as you desire. But some herbicides are formulated as suspensions, meaning that they can settle out if it's not continually agitated. And of course, this can cause poor performance. If the herbicide's laying at the bottom of the tank and you're just spraying water on, you're not going to have very good results. And so this is especially the case if the solution has set, maybe due to stoppage of work, perhaps at the end of the day, or halting because it's starting to rain. It'll be necessary to really agitate that, mix it, stir it up, make sure that herbicide is held back in suspension before you begin applying it. Soil texture. Soil texture is the percentage of sand, silt, and clay. You might recognize the soil triangle that you see here. Herbicides act more slowly on fine textured soils, that would be clay, than they do on coarse textured soils, which would be sand. And so oftentimes it's necessary to slightly increase the application rate on clay soils and soils with high organic matter, and then slightly lower the application rate on sandy soils or coarse soils. Of course, refer to the product label to know for sure. Well, sap flow is another reason when you're applying herbicides to the girdles or frills of certain trees. So we've talked a lot about girdling trees on the back porch, but certain times of the year, certain species, for instance, sugar maple, in early spring, there'll be a great deal of sap flow. Of course, that's why people tap maple trees to generate maple syrup. And so sometimes this sap flow can be so aggressive that herbicides are actually immediately pushed back out of the girdle or away from the frill. and it just runs down the base of the tree, never to reach the roots. Now, here's a case in this photograph. I don't know for sure what caused this sap, but if you look closely, you'll see the bark was severed just a little bit right there. And that might have been bumped by some equipment. It could have even been wildlife that chewed into it, and it broke through that cambium layer. The sap began to flow. And so be very careful when you're using herbicides, particularly late winter, early spring, on trees that might push the sap back out. Of course, pH of water makes a difference too. The effectiveness of herbicides that are mixed in hard water, in other words, a high pH, will be less effective than with acidic water. And the reason for this is that calcium and magnesium can actually tie up their herbicides to the point that they don't work very effectively. Most of our water sources are acidic enough that this really isn't a problem, but that's not always the case. And so adding ammonium sulfate to the spray mixture can help offset hard water issues. And the directions to add ammonium sulfate to the spray mixture will be stated on the herbicide label. And then of lesser concern, it's worth noting, though, that soil pH can also play into it too. So check the herbicide label to confirm whether the soil pH is an issue as well. Improper species selection. Herbicides, of course, are labeled to control specific species of plants. And so it's important that you confirm the identification of the weeds or the trees to be controlled, and then match that with those listed for control on the label to make sure that you're killing the right species. So just two pictures here. Can you tell which one of these is poison ivy and which one is box elder? They both have 3 leaflets. The bottom one is the poison ivy. Typically poison ivy, the leaves, the margins of the leaf will have a slight cleft in it like that. Not always, but oftentimes you'll see a few of the leaves on the plant that will have this. So be sure to look for that. So know what you're attempting to kill before you try to kill it or control it. And then thick bark. In forestry, sometimes this can be an issue, particularly with herbicides that are applied directly to the bark to be absorbed through the bark of woody plants. But it works more effectively if the bark is thin as opposed to thick. And so examples are older woody shrubs and trees that have thick bark. Oil carriers are often recommended to be added to the herbicide to improve the penetration. And if they're recommended, of course, they should be used, but the herbicide label will indicate this. And so you've got a privet here that's been treated, thin bark, young plant, but you wouldn't want to apply a basal bark application to something like this. In this case, the tree should be girdled. This was a fairly decent sized post oak that was in the middle of a wildlife opening, that I was trying to create. And in this case, we girdled it, and then herbicide was applied to that girdle. You can barely see kind of a blue color around that girdle that indicates that it has been treated. So just a few closing remarks. It's been a short session today. Those that are inexperienced with herbicide applications should first seek professional assistance. And I encourage you to start with your local county extension office or your state forestry and wildlife agencies. They are up to speed on this and can provide you with some assistance. And then remember too that restricted use herbicides require a pesticide applicator's license that some landowners might not have. However, it's encouraging that the vast majority of the herbicides that are used in forestry and wildlife management applications are not restricted use. And so you can buy them over the shelf and use them yourself. So as always, I encourage you to fill out this survey. Let me know what you thought about this and other presentations on Back Porch Forestry. This presentation is summarized in an actual extension publication titled Why Herbicides Sometimes Fail. You can just girdle that title and my last name, MERCKER, or you can go to this URL that will be posted back on the YouTube site and click on it. And this presentation will be in greater detail from what I was able to present today. So thanks a lot. Stay warm, and look forward to seeing you on the next session of Back Porch Forestry.